Nelson, he's suffering up in the Gatlinburg area, and he called me a while ago because Loretta's daughter, Linda, you think I forgot that? Found that we have a condensate line that's backed up over into the choir room and into the baptism room. So Nelson wanted me to ask if any of you would be willing to vacuum that water up, either tonight or in the morning. If you do, just see me afterwards, and I'll let him know. You know, always when you go on vacation, there's always something that happens, right? All right. Well, tonight we're going to start a new study on grief. I have a friend, Sandy and I have a friend in South Carolina that I just got a message on Facebook that her young niece, passed away today. She's been struggling with cancer. You know, cancer is no respecter of people. You know, young, old, whatever, and I hate it. I hate it. And so I thought, grief has hit them right between the nose, right between the eyes tonight. And I know that many times you and I have grief experiences that we have to work through, but this is not just going to be a study on grief where we've lost loved ones, because there are a lot of areas where we suffer grief, and sometimes I don't think we know it. So I want to start tonight. We'll get to it when we get to prayer list. I wanted to start tonight with just a basic, just what is grief. Now, I want you to hang on to this because you've heard me say it before, and if you've ever attended a funeral or a memorial service that I have officiated over, grief is basically adjusting to life that has changed. That's what it is. Now, there's all kinds of stages, and we'll probably talk about that one of these nights, but it's really just basically adjusting to life that has changed. There are events in our life where everything changes. The day John Inman, the day we dropped him off at that hotel in the western part of Oklahoma City, and in the next morning he was going to Will Rogers Air Force Base, or Will Rogers International Airport, with a bunch of other young men as they were heading to MCRD in San Diego and going through the process of becoming Marines. Our life changed. It was one of the longest rides back to our house. It was about, if you've ever been to Oklahoma City, you know it'll take you about an hour to get across it. And that's not even doing the speed limit, which no one does anywhere. We're not going to talk about that tonight. We're not going to talk about being truthful. We're just assuming we are. But I didn't think we was ever going to get home that day, and there was no talking. Tim was still at home. But I don't think we talked all that way because we knew our life had just changed. And there's so many other things like that. Now, you know, Ecclesiastes 3 and 4 tells us there's a time to weep and there's a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. We know that there's a time to be born, there's time to die, and within those brackets, life happens. And a lot of good. You know, the writer of Ecclesiastes also tells us later in that chapter to enjoy life because God's provided. But boy, there are some things sometimes that we just rather had not go through. Grief is just a natural expected reaction to loss. When your kids go from home, sad. But then they come back, and so it just happens sometimes, right? Matthew 5 and 4 says, "Blessed are those who mourn." Jeremiah talks about being dressed in sackcloth and ashes, and make mourning as an early sun, most bitter lamentation. Now, there are a lot of mentions of mourning in the Old Testament, particularly. Ezekiel beginning in 27, beginning in verse 30. I think Judy has that for us. And this is New Living Translation. And the Bible says they cry aloud over you and weep bitterly. They throw dust on their heads and roll in ashes. They shave their heads in grief for you and dress themselves up in burlap. They weep for you with bitter anguish and deep mourning. As they wail and mourn over you, they sing this sad funeral song. Was there ever such a city of Tyre, now silent at the bottom of the sea? Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had taken his army and they had overrun Tyre, a Phoenician city. And they were known for being strong, defenders, thought that was an unimpenetrable place. But Nebuchadnezzar captured it, and the people are mourning. I want you to look at some of the words that are mentioned in there. They cry aloud. They weep bitterly. They throw dust and roll in their ashes. They shave their heads. They dress themselves in burlap. They weep, and they're in deep mourning. As they wail and mourn, they sing this sad funeral song. So there's expressions of grief going on there, and we understand that. We understand that. I've shared many times in funerals that, and it was not original with me, I wish it was, but someone said, God gives us tears to help wash away the pain. And so, as I'm particularly talking about the passing of someone, when you think of someone that you've lost, sometimes you're going to think of stuff that happened that was funny, and the first reaction is you might feel guilty about it, but don't be. Enjoy. I tell people, when you think of those times, laugh until your sides hurt because of what they're influenced. But then there's times when you are sad, and then just cry to your eyes, till you cry out your tears. Sometimes I'm going down the road. Maybe your minds aren't like this, but I sometimes think of people at the weirdest times. I may be driving down the road and just all of a sudden think of something and think of something that family member did that was kind of stupid. And being the real sensitive family that we are, we all just laughed at them, And I'll go down the road and I'll be thinking about that, and I just laugh out loud. But sometimes I cry. And so what I want to say about that is okay. Because all of that is adjusting to life that is change. Really, tears also, someone said, is God's gift to allow release from aching hearts. And hearts ache pretty good sometimes. So we're mourning losses. We're grieving out deep hurt. And sometimes we just can't keep from asking the question, where is God in all of this? It's okay to ask that. So as we get back to the definition, and I know you're going to know this, but I want to just start this as a base tonight. Grief is just a natural reaction. It's just a natural reaction to loss. But we are not to live life in a constant state of grief. We want to get over it, and it takes time. Everyone's going to experience times of grief. I remember the first person I remember of the family that passed away was my great-grandmother. She was 87, and I remember my mother coming in and waking me up. It was a school day, and I still had to go to school. But when it's like there, just get up there and go to school. I'm telling me my great-grandmother had passed away, and she was 87. Now, we didn't go to a church a whole lot. We went to a Presbyterian church. I don't know why. But my great-grandmother was a Baptist. And so went to that funeral, and they sang the Old Rugged Cross in that funeral. I don't remember ever hearing that as a boy. I think I was 13. I know it was. But it really spoke to my heart, even during that time. And who would ever thought things would have turned out the way that they were? But I remember the numbness. And then when my first granddad died in 1968, first time I ever saw my dad cry. You know, he went to see one of his sons, lived in northwestern Oklahoma. While he was there, he had a heart attack and died. And I remember that trip up there. And so all of us have those first times that remember, those times that we don't really want to talk about. But because we all have experienced those grief times. But let's understand what God has said to us in Psalm 23. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. He'll never leave you. And did you not pick up on that? Once we walk through it, we will get through it. Sometimes it does take longer for others to process this, and it's okay, because grief is just that natural reaction when we encounter loss. And none of us seek it. None of us surely want it. But it's natural because it's part of life. And part of that life is letting go. It's letting go. When my mother was dying, we were back here down in Hillsboro, and I couldn't get my dad and my brother to see the situation. There's no hope. She had multiple myeloma, and my career has put me into people's lives that had multiple myeloma, and I've seen several die with it. And I knew what road we were on. And they kept on adding blood, and got down to where they could just give her plasma. And Sandy said to me, Sandy was over by the side of the bed, and she lifted up the sheet, and she said, "Oh, Larry, that fluid is just oozing out of her leg." All right. So I thought, well, Larry, you're going to have to talk to your dad and your brother. I'm always in the family the one that's had to stand up and say, hey, everybody else just kind of, maybe that's the preacher in me, I don't know. But it was like that before I was called to the ministry. So finally, a doctor came on Saturday, and all three of us were there. And I asked her, I said, where are we with my mother? And she said, everything you guys are doing is preventing her death. In other words, there was no hope. There was no hope. And so I just looked, my dad was there, my brother was there, and I just turned and looked at him. It's all, it's like, Dad, she's dying. There's nothing we can do about it. We're not taking care of her the way we should. And so at that point, they agreed to just let her have fluids and pain medicine, and by 2 o'clock that next morning, she was gone. And I've thought about that a lot. Probably you have too. But she got saved in a service when I was in Oklahoma City as a pastor, and I often wonder why God sent us back there for 4 years. My mom and dad got saved the same day. Amen. Just those hands went up. It was really cool. And I thought, you know what, Mom, I'm going to miss you, but not a whole lot. Because I know you're in a lot better shape than you are now. And as you've heard people say, if I had to bring her back in the shape that she was in, and she had to give up what she has now, that would be, in my opinion, cruel and unusual punishment. And so the hope is to see her someday, right? I'm sure glad that in heaven there's no sorrow and no tears, because if there was, she'd probably chew me out about something. She was pretty good about that. But you know what? Once we get to heaven, heaven's a place of no loss. You ever think about that? It's over with. Loss hurts. But in this life, none of us will bypass grief. And the process of grief, as you know, sometimes extremely painful. Extremely painful. And that somehow in that pain it's working to help us adjust to life that has changed. And you know, my 16-year-old grandson, and we're pretty tired. In fact, I ran out and watched him play basketball this afternoon in Ardmore. He said, you know, Pops, I don't want this to happen, but you know, when you die, it's going to be really sorry. I told him, I said, well, thanks, Jacob. He said, no. He said, what I'm trying to say is I'm really going to miss you. Why that came out of his mind with nothing connection, I'll never know, but at least I know that at least one person's going to miss me, so that made me feel pretty good. When you're younger, you have to start thinking about that, right? As we get older, we probably think about it a lot. So grief is expected because life is changed. It's not from one crisis. Life basically is one crisis to the next, but not into grief crisis all the time. Grief is going to be expected. And we fool ourselves when we think we have to stay strong enough at any time to deal with every possible loss and tribulation. You know, I have seen people apologize for their tears. Don't apologize for your tears. You know, it's okay. But we buy into the lie. Listen to me. We buy into a lie that everything remains the same, even when we really know it doesn't. You know, sometimes I wish I was 15 years old again. You know, but I really don't. You know, we got to be honest about the reality of hurt, and the reality of gift. You know, like we've kind of been focusing on death here, but grief sets in when there's broken relationships. You probably have had church members, friends, that maybe have left the church because they got upset over something, or they got mad at you, or they passed away. There's changing life circumstances, those health issues, loss through disease, and death. Grief in distance, when people move away. You know, as we were talking about John a while ago, first place he went was Afghanistan. And then on a float, and then Fallujah, Iraq. And when that phone would ring at 3 o'clock at night, because of the time difference, like I said to you the other day, my phone rings at night, I kind of get nervous, because it's usually not good. But you ought to have seen us moving and getting out of that bed when we realized it was John calling, because we missed him. You know, and we're in some sense grieving that our life has changed. So the grief is just a reaction. Sometimes we're shocked, sometimes we're stunned, sometimes we're so angry, we're furious. Sometimes we're depressed. Sometimes our behavior changes and we withdraw from society, and I understand that. But really what we want to do, we'd like to stop the world and change things. But we can't. You know that. But I think out of all of this, as I think about grief, I think about how important it is to really enjoy the day. You know, to really enjoy the day. My dad worked for Piggly Wiggly Corporation for a lot of years. Out of Memphis, he was a company man, and they went to conventions, and they always had somebody, they always had some stars there. And one year they had Frank Gifford, Dinah Shore, and Don Meredith. Don Meredith, quarterback, Dallas Cowboys. I wore his number when I was in middle school. And then in high school, I wore 14. He was Craig Morton. He was Dallas quarterback. But my dad was talking to Don Meredith, my dad says. And I guess they were just talking about life. And Don Meredith told him, of course, he's gone on. He's passed on now. Don Meredith told him, said, you know, I find as I've gotten older, I enjoy taking photographs of sunsets and watching the sunrises and watching birds and just enjoying life. Amen. I posted on Facebook, on a Facebook group, at Alabama the Beautiful. We've planted some new roses this year, and they really turned out beautiful. And when you posted on there, there was an option to make it 3D, so I did it, because that's how photographic I am. Like, I can press a button, and if you know about Facebook, if you post something that people click on it, say they liked it. I've got almost 100 likes of that one picture of that yellow rose named Henry Fonda. Why that, I don't know. But people enjoyed the beauty of it. Well, whether they enjoyed it or not, I enjoy it. And I enjoy going out and look at it. My daylilies are all blooming. I got a whole bunch and different colors, you know. And I don't know anything about that. People say, how do you do that? And here's my gardening tip. I buy the stuff, I go over and I dig a hole, and I put it in the ground, and God takes care of it. That's my garden. I do that with my tomatoes or anything else. I mean, I know when to do certain things, but I'm enjoying the older I get, that more and more. And so I want to enjoy the good times because I know bad times are coming. Bad times are always just around the corner. But what happens, really, loss is our constant companion. We don't talk about that a lot. We're kind of in denial. I've heard people who have lost their loved ones, one of their partners, just before they retired. And I remember a man saying one time, I thought we would retire and travel, but they didn't get to. So we've been programmed as people kind of to be winners. I am not a very good loser. If you've ever been with me at a game, I don't lose well. You know, I just don't. Now, I don't mourn and stuff like I used to, but I don't like it. But you know what? There's going to be times when I have to deal with loss. And so will you. You know, sometimes when people deal with loss, the people say some of the dumbest things. You know, for example, if a person went through a divorce, sometimes people will say, well, she must not have been a very good wife if you left her. You know, there's a theological word for that. You want to know what it is? Baloney. Yeah. Or they might say, well, they failed as parents, otherwise that child would have stayed in church and wouldn't have become involved with the wrong crowd. Oh, yeah? You know, he lost his job. I wonder what he did wrong. If you ever lost a job, you know, sometimes you haven't done anything wrong. If they had been living the Christian life, that wouldn't have happened. Wrong. You remember in the Gospels in John 9, Judy, you got that 1 and 3? And as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who'd been blind from birth. And Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sin? It was not because of his sins or his parents' sin. Jesus answered, this happened so the power of God could be seen in him. People are always wanting to blame when events happen that you can't explain on something that you might not have. If you go on and read that, that's a tremendous story, you know, because, you know, that's where Jesus puts the mud on his eyes and he tells him to go to the pool of Siloam, wash it off, and, you know, then he can see and he can't explain it, and the Pharisees are asking him, and he basically tells them the second time, I don't know, but I was blind, now I see. And then Jesus says something like, I came to heal those that could not see and to basically challenge those who think they see but are blind. Very powerful, powerful thing. And so we want to be careful. I just think we need to be very careful when we're dealing with people that are going through rough times. Because, losses can be obvious, loss of a loved one, get your car stolen. That's a grief situation. I don't remember if it was here in Alabama or if it was in Texas, Oklahoma, because there's been a lot of tornadoes around lately. I know this lady didn't mean it this way, but a tornado had come through and they lost their house, they lost their travel trailer. She said, we lost everything. But then she said, but my dog's okay. And then she said, oh yeah, and so is my husband. I told Sadie, well, I know that guy knows how he rated. That dog meant more to her. I don't think she meant it that way. She was just she was glad they were both okay. Somebody breaks into your house and vandalizes your house. There's trauma there, and we're going to talk about trauma, but you feel violated. When the church I served in Oklahoma City, we were broken into 3 times within a short period of time. And the third time, by that time, we didn't have an alarm system. And by that time, I got in touch with a company, and they came and put it in. And I asked the guy, how much is it going to cost? He said, it's not going to cost you a dime. I said, you what? He said, it's not going to cost you a dime. You just got to pay the maintenance, which back then was only about $35. And the third time they broke in, I didn't live about 2 blocks, and it caught my house. I come driving up down there, and there's a policeman up against the wall with his gun up like that. He said, stay in the car. And I said, yes, sir. I'm not as dumb as I look sometimes. And what it was, gangs were breaking into our church. They had been sent on a mission, and they had to break into a church so they could be in the gang. At the same church right behind us, a guy went out to put his trash out one morning, and somebody slit his throat. Yeah. Trying to make sense out of that. Makes no sense. But it can be some other ways. I knew a girl here one time that made a B on her report card, and it was devastating because she never had. Or if you're working and you don't get a raise or the promotion, and you know the guy or lady that didn't deserve it, that hurts. That's grief. Then those kids go off to school. Sending that kid to kindergarten is pretty hard on moms. I saw a meme, I guess that's what you call them, on Facebook one time. This little boy was going to get on the school bus, and he had his lunch pail, and he had all of his Toy Story characters lined up, watching him go away, just in the life that has changed. Things change, and we grieve them. If you move from one area to another, and the thing of it is, we may not recognize it. We may not recognize why we don't feel with it. And if you don't recognize it, you cannot deal with it. Did you hear me on that? If you don't recognize it. So, and this maybe will speak to this crowd, because many of our losses are related to age, unfortunately. Maybe our dreams disappear. Maybe that lifelong goal we had and we never were able to do it. Maybe we realize this is our lot in life. I'm not going to be a millionaire. I'm not going to retire at 40. Those long days are long gone. I may not ever get to rise to that position, or didn't get to rise into that position that I thought was important. Can't understand why some people that don't live for God get blessed in ways that we don't. That hurts. Maybe a business fails, or you feel like you're stuck in a nowhere going job. But Martin Luther King said, whatever you be the best, if you're a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper there ever was. So as we get older, we experience physical loss. We lose our youth. It just seemed like yesterday I was young. Right? Doesn't it feel like that to you? Some people think they lose their beauty. I've never had a problem with that. Some of us lose our muscle tone. We lose our sight in that we have to have glasses, right? Everything's printed a lot smaller than it used to be. Amen. We lose our shape. We lose our hair. We lose our hearing. We lose our mobility. And we lose our independence. That's a major problem. That's why sometimes in a church, it's so hard to change. Because if it's an older congregation, we've lost control of everything else, and it's hard for us to let go of how things used to be. I saw a deal, I think yesterday, said that one way God humbles us, I don't believe this, but that's what it said. As we get older, this is talking to men, our hair falls out the top of our head, and it starts coming out our ears and our nose. And your eyebrows, yeah, this is all over everywhere, right? Yeah. Adjusting to life that has changed. Are you seeing how grief affects us in a lot of ways? You know, I look in the mirror and I think, what's my dad doing here? He's been dead 4 or 5 years. You know? But we've been thinking a little bit about, is today June 6th? Yeah, D-Day. We were thinking about Sandy's dad last night. You know, he's been gone about 5 years now. He came in the D-Day the day after. He came in on the 7th. And all he ever said, it was awful. You know? And so those reminders of those type of things, and I'll talk about it just something else in just a minute. But while we were in Oklahoma, the day, and I did his funeral. Tim and Dawn had just had Waylon. Waylon was only a month, and they were staying with us. But Tim made it back. Dawn stayed here with Waylon because a month it just wasn't a good idea to travel. But that morning we're getting ready to go to the funeral, and they call me and say, Molly died last night, my lab. I lost my dog. That's the dog that when Tim brought in two one day, and after he'd married, and I said, what's going on here? He said, one of them are yours. I said, Tim, I don't need another dog. He said, Dad, we're going to raise them. He had a male. And I said, well, you can raise them. I don't need another dog. So you know how we are in the South when people get ready to go, we tell them bye, and then we stand around talking another 30 minutes before everybody gets in the car and go. So Tim said to me, all right, Dad, which one do you want? I said, Tim, I told you, I don't want another dog. So Molly comes over. She's about 3 or 4 months old. Molly comes over, sits down on my foot, and looks up. I said, this one. And she was my dog. I mean, she was my dog. Of all the dogs Sandy and I have, it's only one. She was my dog. She died the same day we buried Sandy's dad. And I've learned to not say, well, what can happen next? I just don't, because it might, right? See, grief comes in lots of ways. I have a buddy that I went to high school with. He works at Silver City in Missouri. He's retired, and then he goes out into Colorado and manages a trailer park in the summer, or where campers are and stuff. Well, his dog just died yesterday. It just tore him up because he had to put him down. And so you may think, if you're not an animal lover, you may think that's silly, but I'm telling you what, they become my family members. And it hurts. And it hurts. And you cry over a dog. And you say, how silly. Now, you love that dog. You love that. It was part of your family. It's grief. And just on and on it goes. You know, we're in grief more than we know. And in other words, loss are more frequent than we would want. Some were much more permanent, and some were very negative. I got contacted a couple weeks ago by Debbie Dickerson, who is the editor of Mature Living magazine in Lifeway, who she published me a couple times. Basically the one was the first article came out of a life experience of what can grandparents do to help grandchildren through divorce. And then I got published on an article on why are men so lonely. And she asked, and I'm going to try to send in the query tomorrow to see if she approves it. She wants me to write an article about, because there's a lot of changing churches and older churches, and she knows my background. She wants me to write an article to help people that are dealing with the loss of how their churches are changing. And I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, but she recognized that that's a grief situation in churches. So you just never know what it's going to be like, what's going to happen. So we have a really hard time thinking biblically, I think, when the Bible tells us to rejoice in all things. When we're losing our hair, we're losing our teeth, we're getting bifocals or trifocal, we're losing our friends, our loved ones are dying, and even our pets, and we can't remember where our keys are, right? No wonder so many people are depressed. See, we think life's fair. Life's not fair, but God is. In fact, God's more than fair, because each one of us deserved hell, right? So he's more than fair with us. So sometimes we seem like we can't recover from one loss and there's another. And our coping skills get overloaded. And as we have grown, as we have matured, developed maybe, we're just devastated. We don't like to dwell on loss, but ladies, most men die first. Now, I can make an illustration there, but I'm not going to, because I'm not going to say that maybe women are so hard on men they die early. I'm not saying that. We just die earlier, And I think I told Judy this. I may have told some others. Sandy didn't like to talk about it, but I did. I think for me, I've got everything lined out. There's a drawer where everything's lined out and how it's supposed to be, and if they don't do it, I can't do anything about it. I'll be in glory. But I told Sandy one day, I said, look, statistics say that men usually go first. And if that happens to me, it'll be all right with me if you get remarried. And then I said to her, but don't let that guy get the insurance money. And she looked at me and said, what guy? I got the message. Being with me all these years was enough, If I was more loving, I would say, oh, she just couldn't find anybody like me. But no, I just took it the other way. In the back of our minds, we got to be kind of put that there. But enjoy the moment. Enjoy the day. It's so important. Those stages of life, divorces are final. Layoffs are long-term. Moves change everything. I have contact with some of my people in my hometown. We have some of my classmates never left that little town. But not us. We've been all over everywhere. And they're happy. I don't want to go back there. And I grieved moving away, grieved how it used to be, but I can go back there now and boy, it's not anything like it used to be. Everything's shut down, and the oil left. They were big oil. Our hometown, Seminole, Oklahoma. Seminole County was basically where they took the Seminole Indians when they moved, and that's where we grew up. But it was oil field related. So in what was it, 81 or 82 when the bottom fell out, and if you can remember, oil went to $9 a barrel. You imagine that today? They shut it all down. And then those companies started pulling out. It's depressing to go back there. As far as I know, I don't think I'll ever go back. I think I'm done because there's no family members there. I have a lady that goes puts flowers on the graves for us. She volunteered it. I have grieved through that. Does that make sense? That's what we discovered when we went back to that church in Oklahoma City. We've discovered that Oklahoma is where we were from, but Alabama had become our home. And that's why we love it here so much. Moves can change everything, but here's the deal. Here's the deal. Most of the time, in most grieving situations, there's no quick fixes. You got to go through it. Now, I know a lady out in East Limestone, where I was pastoring when I left here about a year before I got there. They'd had a 16-year-old son killed in a car wreck just right down the road. Some of you know about that. And as far as I know, when I left there, his room was exactly how it was the day that he died. Some of y'all knew H.T. Foote. When his first wife died, I was told his house was exactly the bedroom it was when she died. What happens when we do that is that for that boy, that becomes a shrine. And every time they walk past that room, they look at it and they go back to that initial time, and they've not allowed their spirits to work through it. And that's what you got to do with grief. You know, sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. You know, and then when you have an event in your life and you have to deal with their birthdays, your anniversary, the date of their death, you experience what's called shadow grief. I remember as a kid, when after President Kennedy got killed, I knew when it was 1 year since he had been assassinated. I was in the 4th grade. And I was devastated. I didn't know he was a carouser. I thought he was a good guy. My grandmother had a picture of him right above the TV, right there. And every time you walked in her house, his eyes followed you. But that devastated me because my president had been killed. I'm still fascinated with the theories on that. If you ever want to know what I think, I'll tell you sometime. You probably don't want to know. But it was a bullet. That's what killed him. I'm sorry. We all have those events. When my grandmother died in 1986, grandmother Inman, Opal, we went back to the same cemetery where her husband, my granddad, everybody called him Pappy. He died, everybody in the little 1,500 town called him Pappy. 1968. Yeah, 1968 when he died. They both died in October. And so we pull up to that cemetery, you know, when he died, I was 15. When she died, I was 30-something, 34, or something like that. And we pull up to that cemetery, and that tree, those 3 trees are still there, and they're turned yellow just like they were. And it was kind of a bright October day. And I thought, I've been here before. Shadow grief. And so at that particular moment, we're grieving his passing a little bit and hers. It happens to you, and I wonder if that's happened to you. I just want to pronounce you normal. It's all part of the process. And God will help us, you know. Now, Paul was talking about, you know, the thorn in the flesh, which, you know, there's debate about what that was. But in that passage, he says, you know, that God's grace is sufficient. And his grace, in time, is enough to remove the pain. You know, he pours out his grace on us when we need it. You got Matthew 6, 33 and 34. Of course, we know, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today, and I've shared this with you before. God gives us enough grace for today's problems. And if we get over here in the what ifs and worrying about that, and we drag all of the possible problems with 90% of the things that we're afraid of never happen, and we bring all of those back here, we're trying to handle all of our problems with the grace that God gave us for today, and we'll overload. He promised us day at a time, right? And he's promised to be faithful for us. And, he is there with us even in the morning stages. Psalm 30:5 says, "For his anger lasts only for a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning." There'll come a day when we've accepted it and we've worked through it, knowing that he is going to provide for us, he's going to give us strength, and through all of that and all of this, he's going to love us. That's really what matters. Next week, we'll talk on the back of your prayer list. There's what is the purpose of grief, and and then you'll see there we'll be talking about learning to say goodbye. If that says that the awfulness of a traumatic life experience is July 3rd, it's not. It'll be the previous week. But that's where we're going to be for the next 4 or 5 weeks. And hopefully, here's my goal with this, is that as we understand grief and we take our life experiences, life experiences usually prepare us to minister to somebody down the road, right? And we know the hurt and the pain. We don't ever know how the person feels, but we know what it was like when we were hurt. I think one of the reasons why Laughlin calls me to do funerals, and this is no accolades on me, but I learned a long time ago that if you're going to do a funeral, you need to do the best you can to try to understand how they feel. And that you cannot preach a person to heaven, and you cannot preach a person out of hell, but what you're there to do is to minister to families. And there's going to be people, as this church goes forth, whenever the pastor comes, and you encounter more hurting people, you're going to find people that have gone through divorce, they've lost a child, they lost their husband. There's tremendous need for widow ministry. There's a ton of single moms out here, tons, that need ministry too. Some people have been through divorce, and you know how awful that is. There are lots of opportunities, but we got to know, we got to understand some of the dynamics, and that's what I'm hoping to share, because a lot of ministry. There's a lot of ministry there. Father, thank you for this time in your word. Help us to be helping people. In Jesus' name, amen. I may have taken a lot longer tonight than I normally do.